What is up, guys? We are back with another video and we're taking a look at another Z690 motherboard, and this time it is the ASRock Z690 Taichi. So let's go ahead and take a look. When it comes to looks, we have an all black PCB with sort of like black accents. But the one thing I really like about this board, on the previous generation, all of the gears and everything were silver. They've changed them back to gold, and I think it really makes them stand out more. I really like the look of this board a lot better than the previous generation. Starting off at the CPU socket, we of course have Intel's LGA 1700 socket, and that is the socket you're gonna find on all Z690 motherboards. Surrounding the CPU socket, we have our power delivery components, and this board makes use of a 20-phase power design, with each V-core phase providing 105 amps. So with 19 phases for the CPU, that gives us a total of 1995 amps for the CPU. So if you're running something like a Core i9-12900K, it's not going to be an issue on this board. Covering the power delivery components are two large heat sinks, which are connected by a heat pipe. The one closest to the rear I/O actually has a fan embedded in it, and you can actually install the small included fan on the other one if you want to. The rear I/O cover on the board overhangs one of the heat sinks and really brings the top half of the board together. There's a small Taichi logo, and of course we have the embedded gear. Yes, this gear moves. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. At the top corner of the board, you'll find two 8-pin EPS connectors, and then moving across the top of the board, you'll find two 4-pin fan headers. Initially, you'll think these are for your CPU cooler, but they're actually just normal fan headers. You'll actually find your CPU fan headers below the CPU socket. Moving over to the memory slots, we have four DDR5 DIMM slots, which are metal reinforced. These slots support up to 128 gigabytes of DDR5 memory up to 6400 megahertz. Coming over to the edge of the board, you'll find two 3-pin addressable RGB headers, a 24-pin ATX power connector, USB 3.2 header, USB 3.2 Gen 2x2 header, and an interesting USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A port. Moving down the board, there's another USB 3.2 Gen 1 header, which sits at a 90-degree angle, as well as 6 SATA 6GB ports and two 4-pin fan headers. At the bottom of the board, you'll find the rest of your headers and connections. So from left to right, you have your HD audio headers, clear CMOS jumper, 4-pin standard RGB header, 3-pin addressable RGB header, two 4-pin fan headers, TPM header, a USB 2.0 header, SATA port, postcode display, reset button, power button, small clear CMOS button, and your front panel headers. The bottom half of the board is basically full of heat sinks, and there's actually a gear embedded into them. Unlike the gear on the rear I/O, this one unfortunately does not move. As far as expansion slots on the board, there are two PCI Express 5.0 x16 slots, a single PCI Express 4.0 x16 slot, and a single PCI Express 3.0 x1 slot. All of the X16 slots are metal reinforced. The first X16 slot is actually X16 electrical, while the second is X8 and the third is only X4. There are three heatsinks on the bottom half of the board. Once removed, they reveal our M.2 slots. The top two slots are PCI Express 4.0 X4 slots, while the bottom slot is PCI Express 3.0 X2 and also supports SATA M.2 drives. Moving along the rear I/O, we have a nice integrated I/O shield, which is all black and has the Taichi logo on it, as well as a few gears. As far as buttons and connections, from left to right, we have our BIOS flashback button, Wi-Fi antennas, HDMI, two USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports, audio connections, 1 gig Ethernet, 2.5 gig Ethernet, 4 USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports, and then two USB 4.0 Thunderbolt 4 Type-C ports. The back of the board is partially covered in an aluminum plate, which not only helps with cooling, but adds stability as well. As far as RGB lighting goes on the board, you have lighting on the rear I/O cover, on the chipset heatsink, and along the front edge of the board. The lighting on the front edge of the board, of course, is going to give you some nice underglow, but unfortunately the lighting on the chipset heatsink is going to be pretty much covered by your graphics card. You'll also notice that there are LEDs on the audio connections on the rear I/O. This is great. It makes it easier to identify these ports when connecting your cables. If you're familiar with ASRock Taichi boards, they've always had this sort of clockwork theme. And in the last generation, the Z690 Taichi, they added the little gear at the top on the rear I/O, and that gear actually moved. They, of course, brought it back here with the Z690 Taichi. So when you turn on your system, that gear is going to go ahead and move. Now, it's not going to move all of the time. So the lowest interval that you can set it at is 5 minutes, and then the highest interval you can set it at is 60 minutes. So every 5 minutes, you know, the animation will go ahead and go. You can set all of this up pretty easily in the BIOS. If you don't want the gear to move at all, you can also turn it completely off. So at the end of the day, this is another great motherboard from ASRock. When it comes to the Z690 platform or Z690 chipset, this is going to give you everything that you're going to want. USB 3.2 Gen 2x2, we have Thunderbolt 4 on this, we have Wi-Fi 6E on this. As far as being able to handle the highest end Intel processors, we have 1995 amps of available power with the power design on this board. So you're going to be able to easily handle, you know, a 12900K or 12900KS. We didn't run into any VRM, you know, heat issues or anything like that. The one VRM heatsink does have an embedded fan, which definitely helps out on that. For those wondering, I did not notice it at all in any of our testing. If you have this in a case, I don't think you're going to notice it really all that much, unless you're doing some like crazy overclocking where that thing's really going to spin up. You can also add a secondary fan that they do include in the box if you wanted to, but overall the VRM on this is really good. We can't, of course, overlook the looks of this board. I've always liked the looks of ASRock's Taichi boards. In this generation, they've added, or they've made all the sort of like clockwork design gold again instead of silver like last generation. So it just looks better. It stands out more, which I really like. Of course, we have the moving gear up top there. That's just awesome. Something we've been asking for in Taichi boards for a while. And of course, they brought it back from the last generation. So that is really good to see. I would say there's enough, you know, RGB lighting on this board as well. Not crazy overdone, but definitely enough. Get some good underglow and some, you know, glow on the rear I/O cover there as well. So it just looks really good. You know, there are some weird things about this board though. One of the weirdest things I would say is where the CPU fan headers are. They're right here below the CPU socket. It just makes it harder to disconnect them if you're, you know, if you already have a graphics card installed, maybe you're swapping out your CPU cooler. They're just harder to access. You know, they should have just put them up here instead of down there. I just don't know why they put them down there. You know, and then there's only 3 M.2 slots on this board, with only 2 of them being Gen 4. You know, we're seeing a lot of boards that have 4 Gen 4 NVMe drives or NVMe slots on it. So some things to think about, but definitely check out our full review on the site, which has all of our benchmarks and everything like that. We compare this to a bunch of other Z690 boards. Now, if you're interested in picking this up, we do have the link in the description where you can go ahead and pick this board up as well. But if you have any questions about this board, definitely go ahead and leave it in the comment section below. And that is it for this one, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.
We'll be right back.